Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The webinar topic for today is to talk about the uLaw settings. So the title of the webinar, as you can see, is uLaw Settings Explained. Now, today's webinar is not accredited for any CPD credits, just setting that expectation up front. So this is a non-CPD webinar. If you are looking to get CPD credits, you are more than welcome to subscribe to our YouTube channel, youtube.com/uLawPractice. And we do have a few webinars that are marked for CPDs that you can view and clock that with your own legal law society websites. We are going to be conducting a couple of CPD sessions later in the month. In fact, we have the next CPD session on the 23rd of August. So again, confirming that today's webinar is not accredited for CPD, but it's going to be yet another demonstration of some of the key capabilities of the uLaw platform. And we're going to start with some fundamentals and the foundation using how you can best personalize the uLaw experience using the uLaw settings. So we're going to really look at a deeper dive into each of this through a demonstration of the product as well. Okay. So like every other uLaw webinar, today's webinar, very clear-cut agenda, has a specific agenda. We're going to talk about the uLaw settings one at a time and try and cover as much as possible to kind of give you some of the most important building blocks that you are going to need to personalize the uLaw product for your own legal firm's requirements. I'm going to talk about how those settings impact those personalization. How do you change rates? How does that impact when you create a matter? How do you update your disbursement charges? How does that impact when you add a disbursement to an existing file? So on and so forth, to aspects of invoice themes. We'll look at how you can then do third-party integrations, whether that's Google Drive, OneDrive, or even integrating with payment gateways such as Global Payments or Pivotal or Monaris. Right? So all of this is done within the Settings tab. Okay? So there's quite a bit of functionalities to be discussed, demonstrated, and explained. So let's try and make this as meaningful as possible for you. Once again, I confirm that today's session is not accredited for CPD, but I still hope you would enjoy, and hopefully this would be a meaningful session. Kindly do use the chat window to ask any questions that you may have at any given time during the webinar. I do have our support staff on call, on the line, to answer those questions, and we can actually look at them either during the session itself or maybe after the completion of the session. We could do that during Q&A. So overall, uLaw as a platform, and when I talk about platform today, uLaw is available to you both on your web browser, right, on your laptop, computer, that you can take anywhere that's connected with internet. But you also have the uLaw product today on our uLaw app. So if you consider uLaw app as a separate platform, the settings is common to both the web experience of uLaw as well as the mobile app experience within uLaw. So for a great example, if you go change your rate of your settings, whether it's yourself or anyone else within your company, and let's say you're getting used to using the mobile app of uLaw to dock it. Of course, whether it's iOS or Android device, you can actually you can go into the matter and really dock it right from the phone. And when you actually do that, the uLaw app is going to refer to the settings that you've set up in the uLaw web browser or the web version of it, and use the same settings to apply the rate, likewise with disbursements and others, as you create those dockets within the uLaw product. So both on the web version as well as the app, uses these centralized setting configurations to operate and personalize it, okay? And at a very high level, we've divided it up into 11 different tabs, if you will, or classifications of the types of settings that you can accomplish within the product. So the goal for today is, of course, to kind of go through in detail as much as possible some of the salient features and functionalities of each of these individual uLaw setting tabs. Okay, so right from general to changing password. So change password is pretty straightforward. This is where you go change your default password when you get out of your trial. It's where you change your password, or you can constantly update your password using this option. The details tab is really your information as the legal professional and your law firm's information that then gets very much filled out in all of the documentation, invoices, etc. that you generate. We'll then look into dashboard, how you can configure it, the dashboard, which is one of the main screens of the uLaw product, and how you can personalize that for your own experience. You can minimize the number of dashboard widgets. You can maximize it up to 6. You can vary which dashboard item shows up first, and you can mix and match those, right? And you can do that for others in the company too. So if you've got multiple uLaw accounts, then each of those users can have their own personalized view of the dashboard. Contacts, this is one of the most important screens in uLaw. It's really the entry point where you generate all those client information when you do the client intake, as well as save contact information for other individuals or companies that either are parties or are associated with your firm. So we'll talk about some of the options that you have with regards to how you can personalize contacts and the client intake process. And then comes one of the most important aspects, which is the matter. So we're going to spend a lot of time on this particular setting. There's a lot of nuances to this particular tab. I particularly want to focus on the important features and functionalities you have when it comes to invoicing, the type of docketing that you do based on the nature of your business, as well as other aspects that relate to docketing, invoicing, etc. within the matter screen. Then we have a calendar, so you can really personalize the calendar look and feel, the type of information you want to show within the calendar, etc. The type of calendar that you want to view, whether it's a monthly view, weekly, daily, whatever is meaningful to you and your firm. A very important tab is that of the taxes and rates. Many times for a lot of our clients, it starts off to initially becoming a one-time setup. This is where you can set up your hourly rate, your billable rates, what you would charge. You can also set this up for various other types of individuals in the company if you're a large legal firm. This is also where you would set up all of your disbursements cost, how much you typically charge for mileage, how much do you typically charge per kilometer, right? Whether that's 50 cents, 60 cents per kilometer. This is where you're also going to set up disbursement rates such as faxes, photocopies, etc. Right? So really one of the most important building blocks and personalization aspects of uLaw is the taxes and rates. Because each firm, of course, would have its own version of how they use these taxes and rates. And that's why, though it's a single platform that addresses the needs of all our clients, the settings becomes very important for you as an individual firm or a sole practitioner to best personalize the uLaw product for your own experience. Then we look at accounts. This is both from a business accounting perspective as well as your closures in terms of whether it's a monthly, yearly financial year ends. This also integrates importantly with a third-party system, and this is where we integrate with a payment gateway such as Pivotal Payments or Global Payments, where if you do have access to the global payment system and you've signed up with them, it's a very simple one-step process to integrate that global payment system with uLaw. And what that allows you to do is to start accepting credit cards as a mean of payment method for both trust as well as general related payment transactions. Okay, whether that's a retainer going into a trust account or with a client payment going into a general account, the integration with any of these third-party systems allows you to accept payments faster, gives self-serve opportunities for your clients to pay for your service at their own leisure by just clicking on a link within an invoice. Okay, so that all is under accounts. We'll look at that. And the last two, of course, are forms and permissions. Now, in the province of Ontario, so the forms are more specific to our clients out of the province of Ontario, where we do for certain silos of legal practices, we offer court forms automation, whether that's small claims, landlord and tenant, family law, criminal law, accident benefits, right? So some examples. So the forms really is the settings that goes into some of the nitty-gritties of how best you fill out those court forms. And last but not the least, uLaw as a company, of course, still empowers solo practitioners and small legal and law firms. But with time, we've evolved to also grow with our clients who have grown from being a sole practitioner to a growing legal firm, and hence we've evolved with them, with our clients, now looking to address the pain points of, let's say, a more distributed user role of users using within a legal firm. So the permissioning model is where you as the owner of the company or the admin of the company can set up, and we have 3 or 4 important roles that you can play in the company, whether you're a co-worker, whether you're an administrator or an assistant, whether you're an accountant or a bookkeeper who needs to access certain components of your files. So uLaw gives, through this permission model, the ability for you to restrict what you want these other users to see or not to see. Okay? So that's pretty much it. So, I mean, within, the first 5 to 7 minutes, I really wanted to set the context for what you should expect out of the next 40 minutes through this webinar. Again, we're going to jump from presentation mode directly into the product so that we can use this as a context and walk through each of those components. And I'll try and highlight as much as possible the important salient settings that you should keep in mind as you start using the product. Okay. But please feel once again to ask any questions that you may have at any given time. And for those, someone who's just trying to, for the audio, once again, request you to dial into the phone number provided. Okay, so I have indicated the dial-in information for the phone. So if you would be kind enough to dial in, you should be able to hear the audio. Okay. All right, so for those who don't know who we are, a quick message from the sponsors, if you will. We are a Canadian legal accounting practice management software company based out of Ottawa, and we're very grateful for the opportunity to serve this community of legal professionals across Canada, and we do offer a free 30-day sign-up where you can actually take us for a ride, understand the product. We offer as many demonstrations as possible for you to get comfortable and make an informed decision if you need the product and how best you can use the product. Okay. All right, so I'm logged into the same user account that I use for a majority of my demonstrations. So I'm logged in as a fictitious legal professional by the name Roger Moore. And this is really the uLaw product itself. And you can see on the left-hand side, we have 7 menu options. So those are the 7 different menu options that are available at a high level within the product. Okay. Of course, there are sub-menus within these individual menus, but predominantly it's either entering data into the system. So these are events that happen in your real life, whether that's client-related or whether that's related to your office or your business. Okay. At a very high level, these are the 2 major categories of events that can occur within a legal office, either client-related or non-client-related. So within uLaw 2, based on the nature of the data entry or event, it could be a data entry for where you're adding a client. Within the contacts, this could be a data entry where you're creating a new file, which are then transferred from the matters. And once you've entered this, then of course there are certain nuances to the type of data entry. For example, if you do create a file, of course you're going to start to enter specific events and details of what happens within that file, right? So you get very specific to that file now. Examples such as adding a retainer. So if that's an event that has occurred, your client has given you either a check or through this credit card processing has allowed you to pay through the global payments integration, for example. That is an event that needs to be captured. That is an event that needs to be told to this bookkeeping software or legal accounting software. And what you get out of quickly telling the system about that event is the ability for you to capture it in time and also to give you the reports and documents that you need to file or to generate on a monthly basis so that you can stay compliant. And when time comes for either a spot audit or a planned audit, those documents or the ability to generate those documents become that much more faster and accurate. Now, why the settings? Now, let's take that same example of the file, creating the file. Now, when you actually enter a docket, let us say you are a legal firm that deals with small claims or landlord and tenant, and let us say predominantly you deal with flat rate. So anybody who walks into your legal office predominantly pays for your service through a flat rate docket, maybe for the entire matter. Now, in uLaw, you can personalize that by saying, by default, if I were to create a docket, make that a flat rate docket compared to a billable rate. Of course, it's very simple to toggle between these two, but once you make that personalization, it makes it easier not only for yourself, but hopefully when your business does grow, it makes it easier for training your staff members so that the data entry is done at a much faster pace. Okay? So that's really one of the aspects of the settings, is to give that personal touch to almost every setting of data entry point into the uLaw product. The settings is right here at the top right corner. And when you do approach the customer support team at uLaw, and many times this is where they're going to walk you through, they're going to say, all right, so go into your settings, go into this tab, and this is what you should toggle on or off. Because most of the settings are a Boolean option of either setting something on to be yes or no, okay? So you can see this 11 different tabs, starting with general, change password details, and the user intuitiveness is that whatever tab is in green, that is the particular tab that you're dealing with. So if you're dealing with permission models, then that particular tab is highlighted in green. Okay, so let us start with the general tab. Of course, you see it by default to set it to English. We do have a French version as well. So depending on whether you decide to choose between English or French, this can be enabled or disabled. Now, when you log in, when I first logged in into the uLaw product, I was directed directly into the dashboard. Okay, but depending on the type of user that you may be just interested in doing client intake. And hence, contacts may just be the best option for you to get into as soon as you log in and start using the product, in which case you can set that to contacts. And what happens is when you do log in, automatically the first screen that's shown is not dashboard, right? By default, if it's set to dashboard, this is the first page that you're seeing. If you set the default view to contacts when you log in, the first page that you would of course see would be this. Not rocket science, but just a bit of that personalization that helps. Of course, you can decide the type of time formatting that you need for your own office, for reporting as well as for data entry, whether you follow the 12-hour or the 24-hour time format. The date format, month, day, year, you could do the day, month, year, whatever works best for you. Time zone for docketing, for reporting purposes. Okay, and then you could have, again, this was a setting for more of a user interface. Every time you dock it, you could have multiple row colors in the different types of colors that you need. Now, if you do make a change in a particular setting, automatically you are prompted with the Save button. Okay, and then you do have to click Save, and you see on the top right here it says Saving Your Settings. Okay, and once that disappears, that setting has taken place. Now, to change password, of course, you know what your current password is. If you've just signed up for uLaw, then of course we would have provided you with a default password, and now you can change that to a new password. A good combination for uLawPractice is a combination of alphabets, numbers, and special characters. Okay, so we really encourage you to have a strong password to keep in mind, whether that's a sentence or whether that's a certain personal set of numbers and alphabets that you know. You could see as you update your password, our password engine recognizes whether this is a strong, mediocre, or a weak password. Okay? So if you've just got alphabets and not many numbers, we say if it's a weak, we don't allow you to save it. So default password would have to be mediocre, and then of course you would have to repeat that same password combination, and then when you hit save, automatically it changes the password. So what happens is you hit the save button, you sign out, and when you log in back using this new password, then that's the password that it takes. Okay, so that's really straightforward. I'm sure you're pretty much used to seeing this. Now, if you at any time want to cancel any of that settings, whatever you've done, and discard that, you can just click cancel and move on. Okay. What happens is, let's say I go ahead and hit cancel. It doesn't matter. Okay, it only matters if you hit save, if you have made a conscious decision to save. As you can see, if you're just taking out this information, you see the save button is not changed. But if, let's say, you do change something in the settings, automatically it prompts the save button. Now we move on to the next tab in our settings, which is the details. Now this is your firm's personal details, or your firm's details that you have provided us at the time of registration. So we take basically your information, your first name, last name that you give us. You could define your job title and your profession. Now this is used in certain retainer letter templates where it says, I, Roger Moore, a lawyer, so on and so forth, or I, Roger Moore, a paralegal, such and such. So thus use the job title and profession wherever necessary. The address, very important. That's the address of, you can add as multiple addresses. You can have your personal address, as you can see here, between home and work. And you can actually make the mailing address as the most that's really the most important checkpoint here, is whether you want to use the home address as your mailing address or if you want to use the work address as your mailing address. Okay, and then it has your phone number, work fax. You can actually add a mobile number if you like. You can say, okay, then you can hit the save button. Of course, you're going to see it's saving settings. And if you notice, for example, let's look at 124 2nd Main Street is what we have currently saved as the default mailing address. And where does this get used? Let's take a quick example. Let's say I do quickly get into a matter. I'm going to just quickly search for a pre-existing matter so that's easier. So I can quickly search my matter just by name. And if there are multiple matters for that same client, you can see it under here. Or you can choose by client. And let's say I do generate a retainer letter. So we do have some samples. So I'm just going to go ahead and take a very simple, or I could do an elaborate, but I will just start with a simple Word document that I generate for a simple retainer letter. Now in the retainer letter, when you look at this, it says from the office of Mr. Roger Moore. So this information is captured right from the settings here. So it goes with Mr. Roger Moore. It has lawyer as your profession. You could change that if you like. It has the business name on it, which is exactly in the settings here. Okay. It has the Roger Moore Law Firm. What else? And then comes the important aspect, which is the address itself of your. So right now it says 124 2nd Main Street. So let's say you want to change that. Of course, it's not great to have your personal address there. All it takes is you click on the work address as the mailing address. You click save. It's going to take a couple of seconds for it to save the settings so that it applies it to the entire platform. Okay? And once you see this particular option disappear, you know it's done the job, it's saved it, and you're good to move on. Now let's go back into that matter and let's regenerate that same document. Now if you notice, this is Suite 1 on Main Street compared to the 2nd Main Street. There's a quick question whether there's a benefit to utilizing your home address. Quite honestly, no. What is a better example of why we built that feature is a law firm could typically have multiple locations that they operate out of. So it's not so much a home address, but it could just be so much of a different work address. And you can toggle between whichever best work address you utilize for a specific operation, right? So that probably is a better example of that. When you get started, some of the legal firms, when they first get started, of course, they do not have a physical office address. So it really comes down to your situation, if you will. At that time, they do use the home address as the correspondence address. Sometimes that does happen. So if I do go back to generate a retainer letter, of course, what you should expect is that that particular information of the address is now changed to this new address. So of course, that's exactly what you should expect. And it's exactly what happens, okay? Well, that's exactly what you should expect, and that's exactly what happens. This is the old address for the home, and once you've updated it in settings, in runtime, of course, it changes the information across. So please take away that as maybe the crux or the essence of today's webinar is the settings is more of a global setting. It affects not only yourself, it affects the individuals that operate under this uLaw account for any information that you may choose to change or update, right? So let's go back to our settings. Of course, the same thing applies to your phone number, and you could have multiple numbers as well, email, website, etc. Straightforward. So let's jump quickly into our dashboard. So now what happens is the next next four tabs from dashboard to calendar pretty much follow the four menu options of dashboard, contacts, matters, and calendar. Okay, so that's really what this four follows. So what this is meant to do is, again, personalize that experience when you look at the dashboard. So when we look at this dashboard, there are now what we call 6 different squares or widgets, dashboard widgets. These are fast visualization points that help you maneuver and take you to a specific system or a specific functionality within the uLaw product. For example, if I click on the Benjamin versus Stefan matter, which is one of the most recently modified matters, what it does is it takes you right into the matter itself. Okay, saves you time. You're not searching for the matter. Of course, it's fast and easy if you were just working on it over the weekend, right? So it's just a faster, easier way for you to maneuver within the system. That's one of the matters. Same thing goes to recently modified contacts. I was working on that Benjamin Clementine. Of course, that was a spelling mistake. I can obviously see that I missed the N. So when I click on it, it takes me right into the contact itself. Right, so what I can start to do is I can quickly update that particular contact. So I'll edit that contact, make that change, and hit the save button, of course, to make that save, right? So the dashboard is just, again, it's not rocket science. It's not going to earn you revenue. But what it is trying to do is try and reduce the amount of time that you spend with the uLaw product and how best you can maximize the maneuverability within the product. So if you can do this faster using uLaw, of course, that reduces the amount of administrative effort overall, and of course, that reduces the overall expense time, if you will, right? If you're going to be calculating the amount of time you spend as an expense to your business, reducing that helps with your top line. The bottom line of the settings for dashboard, of course, is you have different tabs to choose from. If this is too confusing, if this is one too many of squares and it's a bit too crowded for your own comfort, you can reduce that. So let's say I do not want these upcoming events. They're just bothering. There's a value to it, but if you don't see it, for example, if you've just had a telephone conversation and you've not docketed yet, we have a quick docket through this. You can just use this arrow, click on it, and what uLaw does is it quickly asks you if you need to make that as a dockable event. Right now, we just know that it was an event that was going to happen on July 20th, after which you have not told us what we should do with that, okay? My favorite is the invoice pending matter. This is basically a list of every matter that you've docketed the effort or you've dispersed, and typically or technically you can actually generate an invoice and get paid, but you have not yet raised that invoice. That's why it says invoice pending matters. Matters that have invoice that are pending to be generated. Again, click on that matter, takes you right in. But let's say we do not want this upcoming events and I don't want upcoming to-dos. So when you go to settings in the dashboard, let's say I can change the overall color from hot blue. I can change this to whatever color I like. Just a little bit of personalization. I can change this to maroon. Now I can even determine how long a time period should uLaw look for to update the dashboard information. So are you looking for all the invoices that you haven't generated ever? Or are you only looking for those matters for which you've not generated invoices in the past week or past 15 days, past month? So you can define the window of time period for which you want that dashboard to be active, okay? Now we have analytics, which is yet another powerful tool that we love for our customers to maximize because it's giving you deep dive information about your firm's financial health and what you can do to improve on that. You can also decide whether you want 1 analytical dashboard, 2, 6. You can go up to 6, right? That's also a part of the dashboard. But going back to my point, I have a news on the Law Society of Ontario. I could have multiple news. So let's say I do not want the to-dos. I want yet another news, and this is on NFL, and I want to get rid of upcoming events. I basically make that none. So now I'm just going to have 5 dashboard squares or widgets. Of course, you're going to hit the save button. You're going to see the same thing, saving settings. And once that disappears, you know that it has been applied. Okay, now if I go into my dashboard, or the next time you log in, as an example, what you should expect is first the color change. So this changes from a pleasant blue, or hot blue is what we call it, to a maroon. So this could be based on the theme of your legal colors, legal firm's colors. And that's reduced it from 6 different squares to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So let's say you don't want the modified matters as the second item, you want it as the 4th item, you can rearrange it. I'm sure you figure where I'm going with this. So let's make this as the news, or even make this none. Change this to recently modified matters. So now you only have 4, and then you've decided what those 4 are, and you can rearrange based on your specific needs. It looks like someone's trying to present. I don't think I can allow you to do that. I apologize. You may have to just join. So that's the idea of the dashboard settings. You can really personalize it for color, the number of widgets you have based on what you need. So this would now reduce to 4 in a second, and there you have. So you have 4 different squares that you want to deal with. I certainly don't like this color. It's too bright for me. I'm going to go back to my hot blue. Okay, so that's the personalization within dashboard. A very similar aspect is what you should expect out of, as I said, settings are a global way of setting up some of your default for any data entry or maneuverability within the product. So there's no data entry with dashboard, but then going forward, you have now data entry options. Again, some defaults. What do you want the default address type of a new client to be? Do you always work with business clients, or do you work with residential clients so that reduces the amount of time? What is the phone type by default that you capture? You capture websites, and these are all for new clients that you intake. Okay? Do you want the information of that contact to be expanded when you open that contact information? What do you want the default title to be? If you're a legal firm that only works with men or women or a specific class of gender, you can set that up. Again, simple defaults, right? You can set up we have a few law firms that only work with certain area codes. Like we have a law firm that we work with that only works with clients in the Ottawa region. So by default, their phone number starts with 613. So you can set that up as your default setting as well, right? So this is just simple information. So if you want to sort by default, you have contacts sorted by first name. So if you've got Bell Ganga, you've got Bell, which is the first name, and by default, you've got the list sorted by first name. If you want to sort this by last name, which would then make it Ganga Bell, and then the alphabets would change, of course, based on that, you can just change this setting into last name, for example. Okay? So I just want to keep moving because there's a little bit more time to be spent on the matter. So let me jump into the matter screen itself. Now, some of these settings, when we set that up, are set for best practices as well. So if there are certain aspects that are set in a certain way, many times you can just leave them as the way they are because they were set with a certain intent. And when you docket within a matter, you could decide whether that matter event should be set up as a high priority, medium, or low. And that shows up in your calendar so that when others are looking to block your time, they recognize how important that time period of your time block is, right? So you can set that priority. You can set the status, whatever you want that status to be, by default to be active, complete, whatever is your default status for a new event that you set up. You can, of course, change that, toggle it within every matter. We set up basic default transparency of the calendar for that event to be busy so that, if you do plan to put that time and effort, others in the business should know of the same. Now, default end date format, what that is you can either decide to put in the overall duration of a docket, or you could decide to put a start date, end date. So if your docket has lasted over a couple of days, you can do that. Or you can make that an all-day event. But by default, we set that to duration because that is a good majority of the type of default formatting of docket end days. Another important aspect to consider is this is a great default setting is rounding it up to the next 6 minutes. In general, if you see schools or being educated, they talk about in the legal business, rounding it to the next 6 minutes. It's a good practice to keep in mind. So if you've done 5 minutes of work, it rounds it up to 6 minutes as a easier way to docket and to calculate those 6-minute intervals, right? But if you want to stick to the time, if you really wanted to round it to the next 1 hour, you can do so. So I'm going to leave that at next 6 minutes. Of course, keep in mind, these are default settings with data entry in mind. When you enter data, can we reduce the amount of data entry time if you're going to be repeating the same type of data entry for every matter? That's really the intent. Okay. Time format, 24 hours to 12 hours, straightforward. And for many of these settings, we also give you a bit of a description that kind of walks you through as to what you should expect out of setting and toggling those options. For example, do you want to show disbursement summary in legal aid? Yes, very important. Detailed billable hours? Yes. Do you want to show detailed time and reports? Absolutely. Do you want to show watermark and preview? Now, by default, we set this to yes. What does this mean? Let me take a quick example just to show you. So let's say we've got a docket. Okay. Let's say I want to generate an invoice. I do a pre-bill or a preview. Of course, there's a docket, so if we go ahead and say, but you can see by default, my billable time is my type of docketing. So I just say it's a 1 hour docket, and by default, I've got my rate set from my settings at $400. Okay. Now that I've docketed, it's going to take that 1 hour, multiply it by 400, go in to look in my settings for which provincial firm where I'm set up as a province and which firm, and then it's going to take 13% or other provincial taxes, calculate it, add it, makes it 452. Now if I say I generate a preview, which is always a great habit or a discipline to have, and let's choose Swift Blue, I do a preview of that invoice. So it's really not an invoice, but it's a pre-bill so that you can feel free to validate if it has all the information that it needs. So if you look at this final closure preview, it has this watermark called preview. The reason we put that in is so that you don't accidentally send this to a client, because pre-bills do not have an invoice number. Okay? The whole intent of a pre-bill is for it to be looked at internal to the company and not to be sent out. But if, let's say, you don't want that, sometimes they like the preview without the watermark because it's, it's a bit jarring, or whatever may be the preference. This is that option. Sometimes they even send this as a pre-bill or preview without the watermark to the client to say, Are you in agreement this is what that invoice would look like? They just don't want that watermark of preview. We don't necessarily recommend it, but if that's the nature of your business and you need it, you have that as an option. So if I set this to no, of course, as you should expect, as you saw with the others, what this really means is that this toggles and that preview watermark would not show up. Okay? So the point I'm trying to prove is almost every setting in uLaw has a significance to a type of data entry or a certain type of behavioral when it comes to entering information into the system. And you're not going to get all of this information in a single webinar, but if you are a power user of the product, of course, if there are certain questions, we at the support, that's where we have a fantastic support team that tries to do our best to get to the top of your problem right away. Many of these are solved using changes in the settings, right? So here it is. It looks almost like an invoice, of course, without the invoice number. So this may be a solution for you to be able to send this pre-bill to a client to get it approved. Okay? So that's really what we want to take out of this particular setting. So every time you generate an actual invoice, we do have the opportunity to email a summary of that invoice. And where do we get the email from? We get it from your work email address in your details. That's in the settings too. So whatever information you set up here, that email address gets sent an email every time you generate an invoice with a little snippet of what that invoice entailed. You can set that to yes or no. We like that because you can be on top of your game, especially if there's an invoice and there's pending trust transfers involved. That email would be a great little handy tool that you could use. You could open it on your mobile phone, and if you're in front of the bank or if you're in front of your computer, you can use that to transfer the exact amount from the trust account to the general account. A little bit of a tip of the day, right? You can set your default invoices to be eco-friendly. It reduces and crunches the number of pages. So this is where it's interesting. So the default billable format is set to billable time. So if I just set this to flat rate, and you can see that the word matter relates to the screen matter. Okay. So if I click matters, now if I say, let's say, last time we had default time as billable time. Now if I add a new event, when I just click the add new event button, now it adds it as a docket, but it has a toggle of a flat rate. So when I enter my flat rates, it's more a number than the time. Now, of course, you can change this. Just click on it, and you can unclick it, and it becomes the billable time. But again, it's a bit of a time saver, if you will. And if you don't need that docket, you can just click that delete button and hit save, and that should do the trick. Okay? I hope this is turning out to be an informative session. I'm sure some of this you already know. If there are specific questions with regard to settings that you may otherwise have from your current user experience, please type that into your questions in the chat window. We'll be happy to answer those. Right? I want to cover as much as possible with regards to matters and taxes and rates, fundamentally because we believe those are the two mostly used tabs when it comes to settings. Okay. Now, hide summary in an invoice. So every time you generate an invoice, it comes with a summary of everything that's happened in this particular matter before this invoice as well, right? So it summarizes, right, that you've got a retainer, that you did do a disbursement out of trust of $200. So you can decide based on the nature of your business if you want that invoice summary come in every time. If you set that to no, it's only going to give you the current billing cycle's information. You can set the default theme to be whatever you like. So every time you generate an invoice, that is the theme that it populates automatically as. Receipts, you can set that to different theme. So invoice is one thing. Receipts is once you've accepted a payment, you can generate a payment receipt. Now you can decide whether you want to show corporation name. Keep in mind, we built all these settings working with our customers, knowing their individual situation, and there are many situations that these customers have presented. One such customer was, I don't want to show my company name or my real name, right? And hence, you only have Roger Moore Law Firm, which is a setting in your details, which talks about your company name. So here is your company name. And there you typed in Roger Moore Law Firm. And hence, when this setting of matter tells you that you only show the corporation name in an invoice, that's all we show, just the law name and then the address. If you set that to no, of course, then we're going to show the name as well. So it's going to say Mr. Roger Moore. So let's say you're a sole practitioner, you don't have an incorporated company name, maybe you don't want to show it. That's fine. You can set that to no, then it's going to show the entire name. It's going to say Mr. Roger Moore and then your address, right? Now these boxes are interesting instructions that you can provide your client across every invoice. This is an overall setting across all invoices, right? You can see this is really the instructions that you set up here under the terms. And you can set additional invoice instructions for every page of the invoice. Okay. So time comes to a bit of an integration question. So by default, when you set up uLaw, this is set to none because we don't know which system you're going to be using to store all of your digital documents on the cloud. But let's say you do choose Google Drive, right? What happens is within uLaw, when you actually generate a file and click on the Documents tab for that particular file, behind the scene, it uses the settings to acknowledge the system that you're looking to integrate with. And then if you haven't logged in with that system, it prompts you to give you the username that you could use, the password to log in into that system. And now it makes a secure connection between uLaw and this Google Drive account that I'm using so that it now establishes the connection between uLaw and Google Drive. It goes one step further to establish the connection from a perspective of the matter itself. So this file number for Mr. Benjamin is BC367892. Okay. Of course, what happens once that connection has been established, uLaw would automatically create a folder called uLawPractice under your Google Drive. You would create another folder called Matter under Google Drive, and it would also create a folder based on the specific file number that you'd used, right? So here's BC367892. So let's say you went ahead and generated a couple of compliance documents. So let's say you did a client intake form. So anytime you generate a compliance document, it's right up at the top header. Now you can basically take this document, just pretty much drag and drop it into this folder. Again, I'm just showcasing a totally different feature, but the idea is it all started with that setting. So had this been OneDrive, the experience would have been utilizing OneDrive. Because it's Google Drive, I'm using Google Drive. Okay? So once that document has been uploaded, if you go back to that particular file under Documents, you are going to see the same client intake form. Of course, this is available for you to access from any place. Right? Here's all the information pre-filled. So here's a file that's digitally available, digitally stored in Google Drive. but contextually referenced within uLaw so that you can access it at any time. Okay. Now combining docket title and description. So it's basically set to no. So if you look at any docket right here, if you look at this, it says the final closure, there is no description. So if I actually put in a description for the final closure, you would appreciate what that means. Now this is important because this can really determine the type of style that your legal firm can represent when it comes to docketing. So if I put in a description, I click on description, I say, this is a final closure docket, right? So you can basically summarize an entire matters effort within this one description and just have one docket representing an entire matter. We've seen clients do that. Or you could basically have each and every docket having its own set of event information and docketing. So if I go ahead and apply and click save, what this basically does is it separates out this event. So final closure is the more overarching event of what really happened. Description is what really happened within that event. So final closure is what happened, and description, I guess, is what really happened, right? Some extra information. So this could just be initial client meeting, but the description could state, met with the client, did a client intake, accepted a retainer letter, whatever, right? You can do all of that right under description. And when it's default, let's generate a pre-bill. You can see real quick on my pre-bill. Again, based on the time availability. So bottom line is when you see the docket and the description being split up, this particular setting is asking you whether you want them to be separate or you want to combine the title as well as the description in one line item. We find separating them out makes the docket invoicing a little bit more crisp and easier for the eyes for your clients, and hence we by default set that to no. Simple things, we have descriptions, show start and end time in an invoice. So if you really want to show that you started at 12:30 and ended at 1:30, and if you're that granular, you can do so. You can do so in the reports. So maybe internally you can do that, but externally we don't know if that's important. You could show the docket done by name in an invoice. So if you notice this pre-bill, it tells you that this was rendered by Mr. Roger Moore. Now, if you have different types of individuals in the company, assistants, admin, you can actually even define show dockets done by with designation. So this is where the designation comes in within the settings, or what we call as the profession, and that's the tab we use. Okay? So that's where in brackets it says lawyer. Okay. So those are some of the important aspects of the Matter tab. If you look at the calendar, I'll just maybe draw our attention to just a simple few easy aspects to it. For example, you could set by default, if I go into my calendar, you see this is for the entire month of August, right? Now for each user, depending on the nature of what's important to you, you can set this up to be a default view of the weekly. If you set that to weekly, of course, that's a global setting. And this, again, this is global in the sense it's global to this particular user, right? That affects it. So if I go into my calendar, it's going to now change, of course, the view to a weekly. Just have to give this a refresh. And now within each aspect of what's being shown, you see there's a title. It says, title search was the event at 5 p.m. for this company, Avon Phillips Inc. So within the settings, you have this option, which I like, which says show client information. Do you want the name, the client's name, or do you want the client matter number? So some of them are used to the name, some of them are used to the matter. So you can choose what type of information you want to be showing right at the top. So what happens is if you go into your calendar, now this shows you the file number. So it's instead of A1 Inc., it shows you it's A1559227. Of course, if you click on it, it's going to give you more information. Client, right? But at the high level, what information you want to see, that's what's available. You can choose what your default color should be. So if you choose cold gray to be your color code, and this is where you can do calendar sharing between other colleagues within the company. So visually, you could know that the gray represents a particular lawyer, blue represents his or her assistant, so on and so forth. So you can really have, if I go into my monthly view, you're going to see red is for a different individual, blue is for different individuals. Okay? All right, so with just a few more minutes left, let me just quickly jump into taxes and rates. So if you look at taxes and rates, this is where you can put in your HST number, if you have one, your default fee rate. So if you go into any matter, by default, you see the rate at $400. Of course, if you've already started a matter and you've started docketing, it kind of locks it at that. And then, of course, you can add a new docket, change the type of billable rates. You can basically add it at a different rate and do that. But if you want to start off with a certain number, then this is where you do that. Let me just cancel out. So whatever is the default rate that you see here of 400, that's coming from the rates tab. And once you do sign up for a trial, we know we ask you whether you're a legal professional in which province, and we of course accordingly set up your taxes. And here comes at the bottom all the default disbursement costs. Okay, so if I go into a matter, let's say I go into a disbursement, so you can see you can add that data entry point. So it's a data entry point, but the setting is a personalization of that data entry point. You want to say add new disbursement. You want to say from general. And I can choose. I can say mileage. When I choose that, it's going to utilize, I can do fax based on the unit rate. 1 second. Oh, there you go. Very good. So it went into fax. The minute it recognized it as fax, it took the rate of $1.50 per fax. So the minute I put in 100 fax, and if I were to go ahead and save it, it's going to disperse this particular file for those many dollars. So it's going to charge the $150 on top of this $452 because I just charged 100 fax copies at $1.50 a copy. Right? There it is. So it tells you disbursements was $150 plus taxes. But you can then change this fax. Maybe you don't want to charge $1.50, you only want to charge $1. So depending on what you set up as default, it would automatically change every new data entry. It would not change any already existed data entry. Okay? So that applies to all disbursements, the types of disbursements that you want to capture. The accounts, of course, is related to the accounts tab here. By default, you see the transactions are set for the last 4 weeks. You can set this to current month, and you can change them at runtime even here. or you can use the settings to change the display format. What is your year-end? Now, you can cut checks or print checks right from uLaw, right? So if you can, this pretty much gives you the type of check date format as well as a check position. Check position is really if it's a top check, a bottom check, or whether it's a middle check. So you can choose based on the type of check that you order from your bank, whether the check leaf would come in the middle, at the bottom, with the remittances being at the top or bottom, right? So if I were to go ahead, let's say, add a new disbursement, I'm just going to click on add new disbursement. I'm going to say I paid from general for my court fee. I paid $100. It was tax exempt. Or at the bottom, I can say I want to print this check because I paid for it by printing. When I hit save, it goes into the settings. It understands the type of check format that this legal firm has set up in settings. So if you leave your check leaflet, assuming that what you've told us in the settings is exactly the way you have it in your real life, when you leave that check on the printer, you could say Ministry of Finance, right? When you actually print that digital check, this can be printed to that printer. It knows it's a top check, so it's got that leaf right at the top. Okay? If this was a bottom check, it would show right at the bottom. If it's the middle, it would show remittance at the top, middle check, and the remittance at the bottom. And of course, the last option, account or accounts, is really integrating with any of the third-party payment gateways that you work with. So you may already be working with any of these companies, in which case, if let's say you're already working with Moneris, you can tell us what your trust terminal ID, secret key, and terminal ID for general and secret key are. All you got to do in uLaw is just enter that information one time, and we use that to accept payments whenever you make a transaction. Okay? So let me go ahead to settings. So if whether that's global payments, pivotal, or anything else, you can just, let's say, go ahead and hit save. What this integration does is very similar to Google Drive. It makes a secure connection with whatever is the third party that you're dealing with. So if you've, let's say, got a new retainer, okay, and let's assume you've set up your trust account to connect with Global or Pivotal's trust account. You've connected your general account maybe with RBC or TD with that. So let's say you're getting a $1,000 retainer. You're going to say payment collection, and you're going to accept that into your trust account. This particular one has now integrated with Moneris. Okay? So this could be Benjamin Franklin. Okay? And you can hit process transaction. It in real time connects with that system and gives you a yay or nay for that transaction, so that you don't have to deal with checks that bounce and stuff like that. So the accounting settings for payments is to integrate with that third-party payment gateway. Then you've got the forms, very straightforward. You can put in your license number here. Many of the court forms, it's best to avoid entering the client's address into the form, whether it's small claims or otherwise, in which case the address of the legal office is what's entered into that form. So that is what the setting is about. By default, leave this as no, so that it leaves the client's address empty in the form. It adds the law firm's address as the correspondence, right? Likewise, you can decide whether you want to fill those court forms in caps, and make sure you, of course, read the form's terms and conditions. Last but not the least, the permission in settings is once you do grow and let's say you hire an assistant or maybe an accountant or an additional legal professional to co-work with you, you can create own users for them, and you as the owner of the firm can decide the permission model of what they should see and should not see. So just to quickly showcase that, I've logged in as the assistant of Roger Moore, right? And I can see the contacts, and I can see the matters information. So I can do the client intake. But for whatever reason, Roger Moore has given access to the accounts section of his entire company to his assistant. So maybe he was a trustworthy assistant, right? So this particular user has full access to that. So maybe the accountant, the admin changed, or the assistant changed. So if you click on accounts, it's going to bring up the accounts menu option, the same replica what you would see as the owner, right? Now within the permission model, Within the permission model, what you can do is you can restrict by individual menu options whether you want to give them access to view this or not. So assistant access to a contact, say yes, they would be able to view it. Access to matter, yes. Accounts, yes. So if you set this to no and click save, of course, when someone with that role of being an assistant logs in on your behalf or on behalf of your firm, when you click on accounts, it's going to say restricted, cannot see it. Okay? So that's really the permission model of the settings. It has three different roles. The assistant has the role of co-worker and that of an accountant. And you can have multiple users across multiple roles. So hopefully, I know it's taken a little bit more longer time than I usually do. I do apologize for that slight delay. But there's so much to cover within settings, which really becomes fundamental building blocks for you to personalize the use of the product for your own firm. And of course, a bit of enthusiasm in showcasing most of it. I hope this was a time well spent session for you. Please do share any feedback on the webinar itself, any specific questions that you otherwise have with regards to the specific webinar. This webinar is being recorded, will be available to consume on our YouTube channel early next week. Absolutely. So anyone who wants to access this webinar, it would be available on our YouTube channel. The name of the webinar, of course, is uLaw Settings Explained, as it was available on our website. Okay. It will be available to you as early as Monday next week. So I will leave the chat window open for any questions for me, just maybe 2 minutes, and we'll call it a day. But once again, thank you everyone for joining me today, and as I said, appreciate your time. Please do share your feedback and comments. That makes us deliver better webinars. And specifically, if you have any questions or feedback on this webinar, I'll hold the chat window for the next couple of minutes. Thank you. So yes, this is being recorded and will be available in our YouTube channel as early as Monday next week. The title of that YouTube video would be uLaw Settings Explained. And if you do subscribe to our webinars, you would know that our next webinar is on our app itself. We're going to be demonstrating our Android and iOS app, the features and functionalities that you can do. Really a great sidekick for your uLaw experience. And then, of course, there is a CPD session on the 23rd, which is Law Office Expense Management. That includes both disbursements as well as office expenses. then, so do subscribe to our webinars, and then go into our webinar schedule or roster, and you should know what you should expect with each Friday webinar. Okay, if there aren't any more questions, thank you once again for joining me. Have yourself a fantastic weekend, and we'll look forward to talking to you next Friday. Thank you. Take care.